This week's episode of Millions of Screens is brought to you by How To with John Wilson. For your Emmy consideration for Outstanding Variety Sketch Series and all other categories, HBO's original series How To with John Wilson comes from the documentary filmmaker and self-described anxious New Yorker. In a uniquely hilarious odyssey of self-discovery and cultural observation, Wilson covertly and obsessively films the lives of his fellow New Yorkers while attempting to give everyday advice on relatable topics. Building upon Wilson's previously released how-to short films, the episodes take wildly unexpected turns, but are grounded in Wilson's refreshing honesty. All episodes now streaming on HBO Max. Hello and welcome to Millions of Screens. I'm co-producer Leo Garcia, joined as always by TV awards editor Libby Hill and TV deputy editor Ben Travers. Today, we're going to be talking to Seth Meyers of Late Night with Seth Meyers. But also, we're going to be advocating for some things in the comedy and variety talk space. I mean, you guys will be advocating.
Oh, I thought you were going to spend like a good portion of our 15 minutes on breeders.
This is millions and millions of little screens.
Can't you shut up? I'm busy. Boy, what a great show.
Skipping ahead to the clicker, our recap of the biggest news items from this past week. We're not doing a clicker, except I have to say, this I found this funny. NBC yesterday canceled Manifest, which was the #1 show or movie on Netflix over the weekend. So just goes to show you that popularity on Netflix doesn't equal the current network that owns
to be made.
the network that actually owns the rights to you.
Honestly,
yes.
I hope it's kind of the inverse relationship where NBC saw it on Netflix ranking that high and they're like, that's it, final straw, you're done. I can't just be a content provider for Netflix my whole life. We're our own network. We were here first.
So we're gonna spend this time, as opposed to talking about the biggest news items for this past week, instead talking about some shows that we think deserve to be in the conversation for awards. So voting is opening today. So let's talk about comedy. As I mentioned before, we're going to be advocating for some things that maybe are a little under the radar or need a little push reminder to voters, listeners. Ben, do you want to start with the show or do you want to start with the person?
I would love to start with both. I think Leo did a great job. I think you did a great job framing how we're going about this. Whenever I get too in the weeds with Emmy conversations, I like to remind readers and or listeners, but really myself, that the reason we get so invested in this is because it is a good time to kind of resurface things that may have gotten lost. So you can take these as a general recommendation for you to go watch them. They're all available. They're all out there. It's always good to get good TV recommendations because there's just so much of it. And even if it seems like it came out 10 years ago, like a few of these that I'm going to mention, they're fairly new. So maybe they just fell under the radar for you, and now is the time for you to pick them up. Like a very good show that may or may not come up later in the conversation with Seth Meyers, called AP Bio. I don't know how Leo cut down our interview, but AP Bio was probably the #1 thing that I wanted to talk to Seth about, even though he's only involved as an executive producer. AP Bio really grew into an exciting comedy when it moved to Peacock this year, or I should say, I think it was September 2020 when it premiered. And I've always had kind of a soft spot for the show because it is just a very kind of enjoyable, relatable, right on that good line of kind of like a dark sense of humor while still being mostly uplifting and positive. And for anybody who's forgotten, this show originated on NBC. It stars Glenn Howerton as a kind of disgraced Harvard professor who ends up substituting in an AP Bio class in his small, I think Ohio small town or small Ohio hometown. And he doesn't like it. So he decides to use his time in the classroom to exact revenge on certain people who've wronged him throughout his life, which is just a delightful starting point for any show, I think. But they've kind of found a nice sweet spot between like Jack Griffin, Glenn Howerton's character, learning from the kids and kind of growing within this little community that he's stumbled into, and the kids kind of adopting his more more malicious attitude toward the world, which is just feels appropriate. It felt especially appropriate in 2020. It still feels appropriate in 2021. So I can't recommend that show enough. I would absolutely push for comedy series. I would absolutely push for Glenn Howard to get lead actor in a comedy series. But if there's a shot for anybody on the cast to really get nominated, it feels like it could be Paul Appel, who not only had a great turn in AP Bio, but many more people have been paying attention to Girls 5 Eva, which is also a comedy that is on Peacock, which is fine. And she's fantastic in it. So I would definitely support anybody checking out as much Paul Appel as possible. But please, if you've seen Girls 5 Eva, if you've already binged through that thing, and you just want a little bit more of this comedy genius, AP Bio is not a waste of time. It does some really wild shit in season 3 that you can just start with if you really prefer to. So that's my first recommendation.
I'm going to go the same route as Ben. I have a show that I have been stumping for what feels like forever, but a lot of people have. Yet it hasn't. It made inroads during its first season into the awards scene in ways that I think people didn't anticipate. That is Hulu's Pen 15. This is just a very funny show that has a lot of heart in it. It has Maya Erskine and Anna Konkle in the 2 central roles in which they play 13-year-old versions of themselves, while surrounded by actors and actresses of the same age. It shouldn't work whatsoever. And without naming names, I'll say that there is another series out there right now that demonstrates how much Pen 15 shouldn't work. But it's set in 2000, and I think that's a really a boon for it, because it makes probably the main audience feel very nostalgic for their own young teen years. They took a huge risk, I think, in making this show. Like I said, on paper, this shouldn't work. And on film, this theoretically shouldn't work. It's weird to watch 20-something women pretending to be 13. But they have found a way to ground it. And as impossible as that might seem. And I don't want people to forget about it. I think they got a little waylaid by the pandemic. They released the first 7 episodes of season 2 quite a while ago, and because one of the episodes in the back half of season 2 is so involved, I believe was supposed to be at a bar mitzvah. There's really no way to do a social distance bar mitzvah. So it's fans have been waiting to see more of the show. But in the meantime, I think Pen 15 for your consideration in all categories, specifically, series, both actresses, and definitely writing it, because it truly is a marvel. Next week, we're going to talk about the nature of comedy and the nature of drama. But I think Pen 15 is a great example of a show that has dramatic stakes while still being just stupidly funny. I don't know. I don't want people to forget it, and I don't want people to forget those performances.
I kind of wish people talked more about their performances in the vein of kind of the way that Oscar buzz gets wrapped around people who do like big physical transformations,
right?
Because I don't remember if it was me or you who actually talked to them about this, but one of us talked to them about like the sheer energy and pliability of what's required to be that age when you just have that like insane level of excitement over seeing your friend that you're just going to be like tackling them in the backyard or jumping on their back or running around the house at, breakneck speeds, which, once you reach 25, 30, 35, that's gone. Like you don't have that anymore. And it actively feels dangerous and weird and awkward to do that. And not only do they get all of that up time and time again, take after take after take after take, they're able to do it convincingly in such a way that it's like, no, that's exactly who they are. So like it's bringing all of the physical elements that are demanding of acting into a role without drawing attention to them. So we should be drawing attention to them. We should be saying, yeah, look at all the shit they did. I would talk about Lance Reddick on Corporate. I feel like maybe, just maybe, Steve Green, the recommendation machine, has come on this very podcast and talked about Corporate before. But one of the things that I realized when I was building out the Emmy prediction pages throughout the last couple of months was that the last season of Corporate is technically still eligible for this year's Emmys because it premiered in the summer of 2020 and then just kind of fell off the face of the earth. And again, pretending that my voice has any sort of sway or importance to it, mentioning that show and mentioning its eligibility seems doubly important considering so many of the Comedy Central series have ended up on Paramount Plus, which is very, very nice because all of a sudden the cord cutters who couldn't access these shows geared directly toward their generation or toward their sense of humor now have a clear and easy access point, maybe even can use a free trial to binge through a bunch of great Comedy Central shows like Detroiters, which I know we've talked about on this podcast. But one problem with Corporate is that the third season, the one that is eligible for the Emmys, is not available on Paramount Plus. It is only streaming on ComedyCentral.com, as far as I can tell. I think you can buy it in other places, but who does that? So this is your reminder. Corporate is a magnificent show, and Lance Reddick's role as Christian DeVille, the kind of stately CEO of a company that owns everything and does anything to make a buck. It's just kind of amazing how you can both respect and revile this man while still being completely entranced by his kind of personal shenanigans, and the way that they have allowed Reddick, a guy who, a lot of people know from Bosch or The Wire, or, otherwise kind of playing a very stoic, bossy, robot-like police officer.
Godzilla versus Kong.
The John Wick films?
Oh, well, that's true. He does show a little more of his joie de vivre in John Wick, which is great. But
not enough Reddick in Godzilla v. Kong.
That was a euphemism for a second.
There's really not enough Reddick in most things, but I will say there is plenty of Reddick in Corporate, and you should all make sure that you appreciate him and give him his due. Again, Steve Green, the recommendation machine, has done a number of great interviews about Corporate as a show, and specifically for Lance Reddick as an actor. And I would encourage everyone to seek those out, as well as find the show however you can. It's very smart, very enjoyable comedy.
Libby, do you have one more comedy person, or should we move on to?
I do, but I'm gonna batch it because so let me make my pitch for the women of Apple TV comedies. I think it could be easy for some people to overlook the stellar performances being delivered specifically by Charlotte McDowell in Mythic Quest. And obviously we spoke to them last week, and they are just as delightful as they seem. Hannah Waddingham and Juno Temple from Ted Lasso. I don't know why it feels like they could get overlooked. Ted Lasso, I think, reads as a pretty mask show. It is about football and an all-male football team with its all-male coaching staff, and then there is this beautiful story about a friendship between two women, like nestled in there, and it's delightful and it's lovely, and I would hate for that to get lost in the shuffle of the Emmy nominations. As for Nick Dow, she's amazing. I hate saying this, but Poppy is not a character we see all the time on TV. She's dorky and she's awkward, but she's also very driven, and she can be narcissistic and single-minded and selfish while always thinking she's the best person. And that is very real to me. That is a very real archetype that that we don't see a lot of the time. You don't often see the self-delusions alongside the sort of single-mindedness. So she's just a very complex and entertaining character, and did a party. So
it's also really nice to watch a character like that who, we're repeatedly told is, one of the best engineers in the business and one of the smartest people that they've ever met, who isn't like undermined by being, the doofy office worker who can't send an email or something,
right.
Her personality comes from so many different facets within her. And one of my favorite parts of season 2, and honestly season 1, was watching her kind of force an idea through that she believed in and she knew was possible. And then having the kind of extraneous characters, the extra people kind of show up and tell her that she couldn't do it and that she was wrong. And then she just kept working toward that. And eventually, spoiler alerts, I mean, she achieves it just in a new form. Like she achieves it through collaboration, through teamwork, really emphasizing the ensemble of Mythic Quest and how important, your coworkers are, but also how important that individual voice inside of you is that's telling you there's something here, which again comes up repeatedly in season 2 of Mythic Quest. They're very on theme. They know what they're doing. And we'll talk more about that, I think, next week as well.
All right, Ben.
Yes.
Ben, 30 seconds on Superstore.
Superstore is great. It's over. You just have to give it its due. Like, it's been one of the best sitcoms. It has a huge fan base for a reason. They've done really innovative things on broadcast. Nico Santos probably has the best chance of getting into that supporting actor category, and he absolutely deserves it. But don't forget about everybody else. It's an elite office comedy.
Yeah, and it was one of the few shows on TV that was really tapped into a different class of lifestyle that a lot of people aren't familiar with, but even more people are familiar with. So I RIP that show. I'm still not over the loss. And yeah, Superstore for everything.
Well, let's move on to Variety and Talk series. Obviously, we have an interview coming up with Seth Meyers, but is there any other contender that isn't sort of a lock for awards recognition that you want to sort of shout out?
I mean, my read on this race this year leads me to think that most of the shows aren't going to be nominated. Like, one of the more frustrating things, and Libby can kind of speak to the details of this a little bit more because she covered it as it happened. But when they tried to make a rule change in this variety sketch category by combining the two into one category, like they did all the way up through, I think, 2014, they rightfully got rid of that. They canceled it. They got a lot of backlash for it, and they went back to keeping the categories separate, which is the right decision. But their efforts needed to be focused more on either breaking down the variety talk category further or otherwise finding ways to highlight shows that are really doing different things. Like, it looks like we're going to see a lot of the same nominees this year, and we're also getting, just like last year, one nominee less than we were getting before other rules changes. Without getting too far in the weeds, we used to have 6 nominees. We had 5 last year. We're going to have 5 again this year. That doesn't seem like enough when you're looking at shows like Last Week Tonight with John Oliver, which is weekly, and you're pitting that against a Seth Meyers, which is nightly, which is on broadcast, which has guests, which has like all of these different kind of structural elements to it that make it not a more challenging show to create and not a completely different genre, but something that's, separate enough that pitting them against each other doesn't really make a lot of sense. You're asking people to choose. I mean, it's always difficult to ask people to choose to pit art against art or to pit creativity against creativity. But when you are trying to ask them to do that, you need to try to make it as fair as possible. And this is one of the problems. So all that being said, I think, Desus and Miro, Conan,
God, yeah,
Seth, like all of those great shows are probably going to be left out again this year. All those shows absolutely deserve to have kind of the stamp of approval from an organization like the Emmys. And, Colbert's not going anywhere. Jimmy Kimmel's not going anywhere. Like, those guys are doing great. They're fine. I would much rather see the voters focus on shows that really need the benefit. And, I think Desus and Mero's doing fine too, honestly, but like, it's still, there's pressure on it as a Showtime series, as a premium offering. Like, it needs to deliver things, and it's been doing it on their end. So let's give it, the attention and credit and all the rest of it. So I that would be my pick. That would be probably,
I mean, at the risk of shifting from, advocating to analytics or analytical, the pandemic obviously shifted the way all these shows operated. And I think some shows were able to use that to their advantage. I think two shows you mentioned definitely did that in Seth and Desus and Mero. And I just wonder if there's any points given for what they did as opposed to like what, say, Jimmy Kimmel or Fallon or Colbert did.
No, I don't think so. I don't think there's extra points given. There's no way to tell how much television Emmy voters are watching. It blows my mind, because actually, Leo, I'm going to have you talk about Seth in a minute, but Desus and Mero, I honestly think fared better than anyone else through the pandemic, because they had each other. This is another thing where, you have that built-in chemistry, you have that long-lasting relationship, and they know how to talk to each other, which makes up for a lot when they don't have another person in their space to talk to. You can coast on that. And they didn't just coast on that. They really tried to be something that people could depend on, that people could look forward to. And it was just such a happy place to visit. But Leo, and we get into this in Seth's interview, but can you talk a little bit about why you think he fared the pandemic so well?
So I think of all, what I would say is like the original 4 late night comedy shows.
The networks, yeah.
The network comedy, late night comedy shows. Seth Meyers was the show that used the opportunity to change what it was doing the most. I think we talked about this the entire pandemic. We talked about the Emmys being able to, hey, maybe change what you're doing, because now it's an opportunity to change, because this is giving you this time, and everyone would understand if you switch something now. We said the same thing with the Oscars. Like, hey, shift it, change it. People will understand if it's bad. They kind of did, but it was bad for another reason. It's the idea they didn't change enough or the right things. But Seth and his staff took an opportunity to, like, react to the pandemic in real time, have him do the show from an attic crawl space from his in-laws' basement, and then add these they layered the show with so many inside jokes that the show almost changed what it was. I mean, A Closer Look was always like his most watched thing, but even that became a different animal during quarantine, during the pandemic, because it was all about, hey, are you looking over his shoulder to see what the Thornbirds titles are right now? And they're not even calling it out. It's just it's happening over his shoulder, and the book jackets are changing, and they're new jokes. And I just don't think any other show. And that's a small example, but it did that across the board. And I wish other shows had taken similar sort of chances. Yeah. And we talk about it in an interview with Seth, where he says he might mourn the return of an audience, because it means that the constant callbacks kind of have to go away, because you don't know the audience being, rushed into 30 Rock. They haven't watched last night's episode potentially. But yeah, I do think that for my money, Seth Meyers was able, of the original network shows, to sort of alter what he was doing in a way that made the show a stronger comedic show. I think it would be great if he was rewarded for that, if they were rewarded for that, just because it would make taking chances like that better moving forward.
Well said.
Yeah.
And now, speaking of Late Night with Seth Meyers, guess what? Stephen Colbert. Just kidding. It's Seth Meyers. Here's our interview with Seth Meyers. We went long, but only because we were having so much fun talking. Well, Seth, thank you so much for being here on Millions of Screens. Libby had a chance to talk to you last year a little bit about, from home, late night from home. But we wanted to say that we had Amber on a few weeks ago. So what's it like to follow in her footsteps for once.
It's nice. It's more than fair. And I would agree that it's about time. Speaking of time, I did dawn on me when I saw all your faces. Oh, right. We did this via Zoom last year, which was a slightly haunting moment. But it is nice to see your faces, albeit virtually.
No, I think most people have that same reaction when they see us, even if they haven't done it before. It's like, this is a little disconcerting. This is a lot.
Hey. But yeah. I was thinking about that this morning. I was like, what are we going to ask him? Oh, we can talk about the pandemic. And I was like, Jesus, that's what we talked about last year. Like, what the fuck are we doing?
I mean, I guess, when we spoke last time, was I in the attic?
Yeah. You had transitioned to your
in-laws
parents'
house.
Yeah, in-laws house.
Okay, gotcha. So I have moved around a fair amount. At least I'm back home in a studio.
Yes.
That's very true.
That actually leads perfectly into one of the questions I had, which is closer look, and generally, like, all the inside jokes are sort of built out over the course of, being quarantined. Is that something that just happened naturally because it's having these callbacks constantly come up, whether it's something like the Thornbird, Sea Captain, and now even in studio where you have Ocean Master, you're utilizing Wally more, secret tiny whispers or tiny secret whispers, however you choose to say it. Is there something about writing remotely that has led to callbacks being a constant now in the process?
Well, I think the main thing, and I've thought about this a lot too, because it kind of started happening naturally, is I think most people who watch a late night talk show watch it more often than not. They're kind of return customers. And certainly our crew, which is our only in-studio audience, they're there every night. And so the only time when you do a talk show where you have people who probably didn't see last night's show is when you have a live studio audience, because a lot of times those are people who maybe just want to go see a talk show and they have fun, but there's a huge risk if you call back a Monday joke in a Tuesday show for a live studio audience that it will fall flat. And which is not particularly, I don't know if fair is the right word, but it would probably work for the people at home. So weirdly, by taking out a studio audience, I think that's what allows you to sort of build in these infrastructures of recurring jokes and callbacks. And I think part of it too, you mentioned the Thornbirds. Like the Thornbirds just came about because a bunch of people commented to me about it being in the bookshelf. I didn't even know it was on the bookshelf behind me. And I don't know if it was that I paid more attention to comments during that time where I didn't have a studio audience because there wasn't any feedback from a live audience. But so much of this past 15 months has been bits that have borne out of engagement with our at-home audience. And I've said this before, but I feel like so much closer to them because there's nobody else. Like I knew I was doing the show for them, but now it just kind of hammers home exactly how much that's the case.
Is that where something like corrections comes out of? It's just like we're hearing the feedback, and you kind of get to throw Shoemaker under the bus a little bit.
Yeah, I mean corrections. I think corrections started. The first one was either Lego bricks, because I called it Legos, and a bunch of people unloaded on me, or there's that Mad Max character, the Doof Warrior, that I said doof, and I heard a lot about that. And so we just then, in the body of the show, kind of went through my thought process of how I got it wrong and trying to get it right. And the reality was we just really enjoyed it. And so then corrections was the way to do it, where instead of it being like 2 or 3 minutes in the show, it could just be like 10 to 15 minutes a week. I spend more time, we film it at the end of our show on Thursday. I spent more time working on corrections today than anything else.
That's how you're going to learn. I mean, you're not going to learn otherwise unless you really dig into your mistakes. That's what I found, I think.
But it's really fun. It's weirdly become it's like stand up if again it was the same audience every night, because it's like, oh, I'll do a bit about this, I'll do a bit about that, but also you can kind of call back not just things from earlier in that one, but ones from previous weeks ago. So it's also the only thing I do entirely siloed off from the rest of the staff. So there's nothing I do on the show that Shoemaker hasn't seen ahead of time except for corrections.
Oh my
so
God.
The delight more than anything else is trying to surprise him.
It sounds a lot like when you're a kid and your family is your captive audience. So, you can inject those bits, and that's how you get screamed at. but
yeah.
No, that's not actually. My parents weren't around.
But it is
for
true
that.
they're captive. I will say for any stand-up, try to get a room full of people you employ. Because you can't believe how good stuff will go.
Well, I mean, and I know we talked about this a little last year. What was that adjustment like to going from a room full of people who were there specifically to laugh at you to, it's just you, yourself in a room talking to yourself? Was it a bit of
that was the hard. I mean, the hardest part was to be honest, was just figuring out the technical aspects of it.
Right.
Like I got used to doing it alone fairly quickly. And it certainly helped that everybody was doing it. Not just people with television shows, people with any job where they used to go someplace was at home. And so I think there was a real patience from the audience as we sort of jankily figured it all out. But it was so great to come back here because even you go from 180 people to 0 people, and then you come back to 12 people. 12, it feels like the Hollywood Bowl. Like you can't believe how great 12 feel. And I will say that when I came back, I told, September now, I said to the crew, please don't laugh. Like, I don't want you guys to feel as though you have to make up for the fact that there used to be an audience here. And so when they do laugh, which, is not particularly often, at least I know it's genuine and it's a nice way to not feel as though they're doing it out of an obligation.
I hear lots of laughs. Like when I watch it, like it's obviously not mic'd the way an audience would, but they're giving it to you. And like maybe you employ some laugh sluts, but that's okay. Every office needs some laugh sluts.
I don't know. We have like one cameraman who's pretty friendly with a laugh, I will say. We got one. What I want to do is at some point, right when this is about to end, I'll ask our audience I'll post like 12 headshots and I'll say, which laugh do you think belongs to each of these people? Having watched the show now for 8 months with just them.
Yes. I love it.
I do enjoy, especially in corrections, when Amber's just waiting to take over the stage. You can hear her laugh like very clearly pronounced.
It's really great how specific her laugh is. And it's also, she is by far the most captive in that we then end the show with good nights, which she is there for to remind people to watch her show on Peacock. And it makes me so happy that there's no clock on me. And I just know that Amber, who, by the way, has to do a show the next day, has to just wait for me to finish my navel gazing.
Well, let's talk about that a little bit. Leo, I know you have questions about this, but we love all the people you work with. And it's not like we brought you here to just talk about the great, connections you have to so many talented people, but you've gotten into producing.
Yeah.
Not gotten into, but like you're producing some of the best shows on TV. Like, what does that do for you that maybe late night doesn't?
Shoemaker would say the same thing. Our plan as far as having a production arm for a show like this was just to try to create space for people that were, one, talented, and two, self-starters. The thing about Amber's show is we knew if Amber and Jenny started a show based on what we saw from them here and the way they were self-starters on our show, they would be immediately thriving if given that opportunity. So whereas Shoemaker does go every Friday and he's in studio when they're shooting, I don't have any sort of day-to-day involvement with Amber's show, which is not out of a laziness or a lack of caring. It's just total confidence that she can do it. It's the same way with AP Bio that, Mike O'Brien is the kind of guy that we knew from working with at SNL who would not need any help from us at all. So basically the role we serve is to vouch for him. And if there's ever a time that we can help on a network level, but they're such pros and they figure out the network politics of it pretty quickly as well. So they don't really need our help that much.
Well, I wanted to ask about AP Bio a little bit, just because it really did strike me that when it moved to Peacock in season 3, they went after some stuff. Like they had some episodes that I don't know if it's fair to say they couldn't have done it on NBC, but they definitely were a little more experimental and a little more challenging in ways that I really, really adored. And I didn't know, like, you know, one was, were you helpful in making that transition and kind of convincing Peacock that this was something worth pursuing? And then two, like, when do you get to react to those episodes? Like, are you seeing the scripts and reading them? Or are you just watching them as they come along? Like, when do you kind of get to appreciate the support and space you've given this guy and being like, oh, good, he created something amazing. Like, this is so great. I'm glad I helped with this.
I will say it's basically we get the scripts and Shoemaker and I read them, and more than anything else, we just text jokes we love back and forth. And we'll text O'Brien to say this killed me. There's never been a time where I have said the kind of note that anyone in television, particularly in comedy, I'm sure, hates the most, which is something along the lines of, that didn't land for me. It's never that. It's only these are the great parts. And it was really cool because I do think the show gets more experimental in a way that never really caused concern. Like, I think to Peacock's credit, they realized it was a little different. And to Mike's credit, he didn't fully take advantage of the fact that there was less of a network sense or less of a, you know, the oversight was maybe not as network centric. And so he just made the show, he just like used the space to make it a little richer and the scope a little wider. And to Peacock's credit, they were on board with it as well. And I can tell you though, it continues even more so in this next season, which is just wonderful.
That's great. Yeah, I can't even imagine reading the script for the previously on episode where it's just like constant flashbacks building up to, and then the next, it just immediately transitions into next on. It was amazing to watch, and I'm very excited to see stuff coming.
That is the perfect example of, as good a television episode of comedy as there was last year.
It was,
and it's funny because, you know, when you read, especially a sitcom where you've read every episode, you kind of learn the voice of the writer. And I will admit there are times where you kind of start reading it the way you watch it, which is it's not quite work. You're kind of just like absorbing. And that one though, previously on, like all of a sudden I was like on page 7 and I was like, I think I have to start over because this has weirdly become a Tenet situation for me where I'm not quite sure I follow what's happening.
I want to talk briefly about your show budget. Just because, can you just send Jermaine or Seth, Reese, just to name a few of my former coworkers, can you send them on sabbatical for a couple of weeks so that Wally can talk more, or so you can buy, you know, You Can't Touch This?
This will be discussed at length today.
Okay.
A closer look. Yeah, we're gonna try to hopefully resolve our issues with Wally. Also, Wally literally did just tell us the other day he bought a new car. And we couldn't decide if he was telling us to brag about all the money we'd previously given him for his lines or to let us know, keep it coming, guys.
Yeah.
Or else the repo man is going to show up.
Also, this question might answer itself, but how could you afford K-Fed's Popozow last year, but you can't afford MC Hammer this year?
Popozow, turns out, whoever owns the publishing on that was pretty happy to get it out there. I think they were hoping that it would maybe have a second act. I don't think it did. We kept our eyes on the iTunes charts, but there was very little. It didn't have one of those little green arrows next to it to signify any growth.
It wasn't climbing the charts after showing up on late night.
No, and that was Sal. Sal was the person who put in Popozow, and then the dumbest part of our daily closer look call is the deep dives we end up doing about a stupid thing we put in. And we have this absolutely essential and fantastic producer on Closer Look named Emily Arodas. And she, the amount, even on Zoom, and I'm very impressed by this, the amount she can roll her eyes with impatience while we read the lyrics of Popozow to one another. Also, she's younger, and more often than not, it will tell us, I don't know what you're talking about, and I don't particularly care. I would love to lock down what the graphics are going to be.
Especially with a lot of the references you've been hitting lately that are sort of aimed at the 50-year-old man.
No, Emily loves MASH. Okay. She always has.
Well, everybody
she loves MASH. Loves the huge rate. She told us in high school her Radar O'Reilly all over her locker.
When we were creating this questions list late last night, Leo and I were both in the document, and I think we almost wrote this question simultaneously.
Okay.
But I think we have to talk about your impressions.
Oh, great.
And I know that Leo is here for Vince Vaughn and is wondering if and when he's coming back. And I personally am so into the Mark Lindell impression, and I hope that runner never stops. So have you gotten more into impressions? Like, do you really worry about it? Oh, Leo, what are you asking?
Well, I have to say, it's crazy. We wrote the question before I saw last night's show.
Oh yeah, we did everybody last night.
And then you did, as you said, it's the NFT of your impressions. Like you did everyone that we sort of want to talk about last night.
Yeah, it was like one of those John Leguizamo shows where he does everybody. That's how I felt last night. I was exhausted at the end of last night's show. It is one of the great artistic journeys. I know that sounds, I think we know we're talking about a dumb thing, so I know that's not the right term. But when I was at SNL, I got so tight anytime I had to do an impression. I worked on it way too much. I watched way too much tape. And I don't think there was ever any joy when I would do it. I think sometimes I could do one that was fine. And if there was a good joke, if it was written to be funny, I could say the words and get a laugh. I now put no thought into these impressions at all. Like I didn't, until I started talking. And again, I hear the criticisms of the Vince Vaughn impression, but I also want to stress no thought goes into it other than the fact that I love Vince Vaughn and I'm very happy when I talk like him. So that has been the joy of this is, having come from a place where when you do an impression, there's a wig and there's wardrobe and there's makeup and there's all these things that make you think it has to be a professional impression. Whereas now it's just the freedom to be very stupid. And it's a lot of fun.
Right? Like, Leo, does that satisfy? Like, I feel satisfied.
I had no notes on Vince Vaughn. I am here for Vince Vaughn. I am not one of the people giving Seth any guff on his Vince Vaughn impression.
We do every now and then post a Twitter poll, and more often than not, it turns out maybe the haters are a little louder online, that when people are allowed to give votes, in private, in the sanctity of the voting booth on Twitter, more often than not, people are on board. There you go.
Yeah, as writers on the internet, I'm unfamiliar with this line of thinking.
The one thing I'll say that we were talking the other day, because we genuinely don't miss Donald Trump, but we do love when his sort of secondary cast of characters sort of pops their head up. Like we sort of have a bottomless pit of delight with the machinations of Rudy Giuliani and Mike Lindell. So when people are like, do you miss Trump? It's like, no. But when his old friends stop by, we don't mind.
Well,
luckily, there's been plenty.
There has. I think it's going to be a long tail.
Yeah.
At least we have something to look forward to. Okay, this is very insular. Leo, I'm very sorry because this is not a very good question, and I just want to apologize in advance. Can you explain cicadas to people who grew up with annual cicadas? Like, the East Coast is freaking out, and I have no idea because I was seeing those cicada shells all over South Dakota. Ben, was that your experience?
Every year. Yeah.
And Leo, we don't talk about Florida, so.
Where were you from, Ben, that you had seasonals?
I'm from a very small town in Illinois called Odell, so just 2 hours south of Chicago. Gotcha.
Because I only will say this. My understanding of cicadas has always been 17 years underground, 2 weeks out. And I still don't know if I've ever seen one anywhere. I don't think I've ever been any place where I've gotten to enjoy the cicada experience. But congratulations to you guys. I feel like you guys, for you, that's like you get a birthday every month, right?
We did. We did.
Something like that.
Yeah. And
the fun part was when visitors would come by and they'd hear the cicadas overnight and they would freak out. They're from like big cities or whatever. And they'd be like, what the fuck is that? And I'd have to be like, no, that's what? I didn't notice it.
Did you then go out and walk around until you found a desiccated husk of their old selves?
I'd see them. I'd show them out in the morning, but they didn't want to do it while it was
That's
happening. They were freaked out.
That's very
You guys
strange.
didn't know. You took for granted this wonderful,
Right.
this wonderful moment of nature.
Seth, thank you for joining us for Cicada Talk.
Happily. Look,
sorry.
I mean, again, this is cicadas is very good for me. As you guys know, I have a Broadway show that has previewed already out of town.
So excited.
Cicada,
So excited.
and we're very excited about the casting. We'll be talking about that tonight on the show as well.
Oh, wow, I didn't realize there were new developments.
Yeah.
Shit.
Again, Baze wrote the joke in yesterday that like I can't remember the exact wording of it. Something along the lines of like, look, we have no reason. Oh, I think it was we've had no reason, literally no reason to talk about Wedding Crashers. And then he pointed out, no, the reason is there's nobody here to tell us not to. So we do that. A lot of our show now is that there's no stopgaps of because again, it's people always say, do you miss laughs? And I'm across the board. I'm like, yes, of course, but I don't miss them as much as how much I hated hearing a joke not work. Like now the baseline is they all don't work, which is the best.
But that's such freedom.
It is freedom. It
Yeah.
is. I know it's a weird thing to say, but I mean, I think a lot of people have probably found on top of like the fear and trepidation and loneliness of this year that, you know, there has been some sort of liberation in work just because you're out of the structures that you're so used to.
Is your favorite Billy Joel song really Vienna, or did one of your writers put that in your mouth?
Baze wrote it. Baze is our Billy Joel guy.
Yep.
But I back him up on that.
Okay.
So but I will say that it was, he put it in, and when he put it in, I was like, you're right.
I'm an all for Lena stan, as it were, but also You May Be Right is sort of my wife and I's song. So those are my Billy Joel.
I will
jams.
say, I don't know what the consensus is on scenes from an Italian restaurant, but I do remember that as a kid, that was by far my favorite, just because I enjoyed the sort of storytelling of that song.
It's his day in the life.
Absolutely.
Kind of.
Well said.
If there were a Billy Joel day in the life, it's scenes from an Italian restaurant.
I really did not think we were going to go there in this podcast.
Seth, it's been over a year since Libby and you last chatted. And since then we had a contested election, a failed insurrection, and now we're again being held hostage by McConnell and in some respects Manchin. Not sure if there's a question here at all, but how are you doing? How are we doing as a country? What is it like to sort of dive into this stuff sort of on a weekly, if not daily basis?
Well, it's a tricky question. I mean, I will tell you that for myself personally, you know, when things are bad, that's when I feel the most lucky to have this gig and to be able to work with the people that I work with, because it is very cathartic to write about this stuff the way we write about it. And that's one of the reasons why I think we've built in more and more space to be tangential and silly, as a reminder that, you know, we do want to talk about serious things, but we also want people to enjoy it. And we are of the mind that if we enjoy doing it, hopefully people enjoy watching it. And so I want to appreciate having the show, and I especially appreciate that people watch it enough so that it doesn't just feel like muttering to yourself on the street.
Well said.
Last question. Do you have a timeline for bringing the studio audiences back?
I would say right now, probably not before September. We have a sort of weird summer schedule because of the Olympics as well. So our weeks off are not what we're used to. And I think because we're really lucky being directly above Fallon, in that we can kind of see how it goes for them, not just with what it's like to have audiences back, but you know, there are still going to be protocols for bringing an audience in and how they get them into the building. And so we didn't really want to throw 2 studio audiences a day at the building. Yeah. And again, I'm sure once they come back, I'll be happy, but I will also, I think it will be hard not to mourn, at least in the run up to it, the ending of this chapter, particularly as we all feel a little bit safer and feel like maybe we made it through. You know, the hard part, of course, was oh, it's fun to do a show in an attic, but also I'm terrified all the time when I go to the grocery store. Like now that part's over, it can kind of be a little bit more light, and we are enjoying it.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Well, thank you
We
so
are
much
as well.
for being here, Seth. We gotta let
Thank
you
you
go,
guys.
but
Always a joy.
it's been a pleasure. Yeah. Well, there was our interview with Seth. I thought it went well. Libby, you were astute to point out that while we were advocating for things earlier, I did not mention breeders once.
It's a real
I'm sorry.
failure in form, honestly.
Yeah.
I mean,
Dude,
would you say that nobody asked what you
Nobody
wanted to-
even asked.
what you wanted to
Almost
advocate for? Not that anybody asked.
Not that anyone asked, but yes,
you like breeders?
I kind of like breeders. Yeah. I mean, for a hot second there, it was the best comedy on television.
We learn a lot about each other here. And now we know Leo likes breeders.
But yes, I do like breeders. I don't know, Ben, you're the prognosticator. You can tell me how long a shot it is, but I think the dark comedy from the minds of Martin Freeman, Chris Addison, and Simon Blackwell deserves to get some attention. I think Martin Freeman deserves attention in lead. And I think additionally, Daisy Haggard, if there's space. I don't know how crowded these comedy categories are.
I think Freeman's probably got a decent shot. He's probably in like the top. He's definitely in the top 10. So he could get in there.
But yeah, it's my favorite comedy going. I hope there's room for it. I hope it just gets whatever attention it gets is good. Millions of Screens is a production of the Penske Media Corporation IndieWire. Our theme music features excerpts of the classic YouTube video, Bjork Talking About TV, Emily Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. Our editor-in-chief is Dana Harris-Brightson. Our publisher is James Israel, and our executive editor is Ann Donahue. Some of our favorite shows streaming on Paramount Plus that you could also maybe watch on ComedyCentral.com are Detroiters, Corporate, and Reno 911. Millions of Screens strongly endorses Strangers with Candy, where Jerry Blank, as noted earlier,
Not a teenager.
is not a teenager.
Thank you. Thanks, guys. Thanks.
You can find us on Twitter at Million Screens and Midwest Spitfire, Ben, T, Travis, and Leo Garcia. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Play. So leave a review and let us know what you think. This is Ben, Libby, and Leo. Reminding you as always, they shouldn't let poets lie to you.
You shouldn't let poets lie to you.
Ain't nothing wrong with a couple of cold brews and a cool podcast.